Well, it looks like Warframe and its parent company are in a bit of trouble under Tencent. Let's get into the news. Well, it seems even after Tencent's acquisition of Leyou Technologies, everything is still not okay for the company. And for those of you who don't know who Leyou Technologies are, or what they are exactly, they are Warframe's owners. They are the owners of Digital Extremes. They own Warframe, they fund the game, and everything that goes inside of it. Now, I know many of you are going to ask, how exactly does this relate to Tencent? And the answer to that is actually quite simple. Digital Extreme's parent company, Leyou Technologies, actually ended up being in a bit of trouble in 2018, and so that led to them selling off in 2020, and they sold to Tencent, thus making Tencent the new owners of Digital Extremes and Warframe itself. But as of 2021, there are current reports saying that Leyou Technologies is currently in a bit of struggle right now under Tencent, and that Warframe's profitability still might be of some concern. Now, what's interesting about these reports is that they are coming out right after the fact that Leyou's CEO, who has actually decided to step down from the company. Now, this alone wouldn't be any cause for concern usually, because usually CEOs do tend to leave companies from time to time and move on to another company. Now, not only has it been reported that the CEO has left, but it's also been reported that several projects have actually been cancelled. And actually a 200-person team to one of these projects has actually left the company. Now, I really want to give you guys a clear image of how bad things are at Leyou Technologies. So for this, I really want to make sure I give this information as clear as possible, because there's no real timeline to this, as all this information just kind of came out of nowhere. Now, I want you to keep all this in mind, because all this went down in April, and I want you to make sure to remember that month, because we're going to be talking about this in a little bit. Now, the reports are that employees from both Leyou's Beijing and Shanghai offices completely left after the acquisition by Tencent. Now, not only did those employees leave, but also the 200-person team that I mentioned before, they were actually in charge of Civilization Online before they actually had left. So the entirety of that team had actually left the project. And not only with all this stuff, again, you also have the fact that the former CEO had actually left the company also around April. So remember how I told you guys to remember April, to remember this month specifically? Well, the reason being is because it was actually in April that we found out that a Lord of the Rings MMO was actually cancelled between a dispute with Leyou Technologies and Amazon Games. Now, I did some digging into this information and actually found an article posted by TFW 2005 that actually talked about a Transformers game that was in development at Leyou, and this project actually ended up being cancelled. Now, the reason I'm talking about these stories is because it's important to understand how dire things are at Leyou right now, and that not only did you have a team of developers that left a project that was still being worked on, but of course you also had other projects being cancelled straight up. Now, all this information is actually coming from one news outlet, and that news outlet is from the South China Morning Post. Now, according to them, their sources are saying that the reason these projects went cancelled underneath the rug is because Tencent never actually cared about these projects. They only cared about one asset that Leyou had, but we'll get to that a little later on. Now, it's important to also talk about why all this is happening at Leyou, why all this is going down, and part of the reason is because of the people in charge. Now, there are people in charge that, according to the sources within Leyou, are saying that the higher-ups don't really care about video games, and the people before did care about video games itself. That's why they were trying to grab IP and make video games out of them, such as Transformers, Lord of the Rings, etc., etc. But what can be described here is a shift in work culture here at Leyou. And part of the reason this work culture shift happened was because during the time when Leyou was looking for a sale, they actually were putting people in place to try to make them look as if they were worth more than they were actually. That's why you saw Leyou buying up IPs such as Transformers and Lord of the Rings to work on, but they never really had any intentions, of course, of developing a decently made game, according to the sources within Leyou. So then with the counterclash of the people who actually were passionate about making games and the people who were strictly there on the business side, of course you would have a clash in culture in Leyou, and then this is why all this had happened. Now, according to South China Morning, they were told from those sources that Tencent never really cared about any of the assets that Leyou actually owned. They just cared about a 20% stake within Certain Affinity. Now, when it comes to Certain Affinity, there isn't anything much that stands out when it comes to them specifically, because most of the games they worked on have been the multiplayer ends for other games from other developers, such as Halo or Call of Duty, as examples. And this always leads me to my next question. Why purchase Leyou for one developer? And it's not even a developer they own, it's just a stake in the developer. Granted, it's a huge stake that gives them a seat on the board. Now, one of the reasons why I never really really completely written this idea off as a least likely possibility is because of the fact that we have, of course, canceled projects. And these projects are big IPs such as Transformers and Lord of the Rings. So why would they cancel these games? And of course, Tencent has actually stayed quiet on the Lord of the Rings cancellation. They never even responded to that. And of course, all this led me to wonder, what about Leyou's only big IP that they own? The only IP that is truly theirs. That would be Warframe. Again, Leyou owns Digital Extremes, who make Warframe. But actually, as it turns out, according to the South China Morning Post, they actually reported that Warframe has actually been struggling in terms of revenue. Now, more accurately speaking about this, they are actually saying that the game has actually become less profitable than it was last year. And remember, the whole reason why Leyou sold was because of Warframe's profitability issues. It kept lowering and lowering even more, which put them into a state where they had to sell. Now, if this news is accurate about Warframe, we could see a scenario where Tencent will stop caring about Warframe itself and will not see a reason to keep supporting this game if it's just bleeding money and resources. Now, to round this all together, again, like we talked about before, Tencent was willing to cancel Transformers and Lord of the Rings. If they were willing to cancel those big IPs, imagine what they'd want to do with Warframe. They could just shut it down completely, making the game unplayable. Now, according to MMO Bomb, another article that has reported on this story, they're saying the best case scenario for Warframe is if Tencent does lose interest in this game, that they could sell it off to another company. But seeing as how Tencent's not really known for selling companies off to other people, I don't really see this as a possibility. And that's why I wanted to talk about this story, because I am a Warframe player. I love Warframe and I really do enjoy the game. So if it is shut down, I'll be upset, of course, because I have spent hours in Warframe. And of course, not a lot of people are talking about this like they should be. So I wanted to inform the Warframe player base and community about this situation. But with that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and subscribe and tell me what you want with Warframe. How would you try to save this game? But with that, hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day and peace.